Now then, it's Burnsy. Welcome to the latest edition of the Curiosity podcast, the CuriosityCast. So hopefully you'll have listened to part one of the CuriosityCast with Paul Jackson. Jacko is here with us, or we're here with Jacko because we're making a home visit today. So this is part two. Let's talk a bit of music, Paul. Which are the nights that stick out for you, or the bands or the artists you think, yes, that was it? That was pure Adelphi.
Well, everybody sees a need for brand associations. So, I mean, obviously, we had the House Martins, and the Beautiful South never played the Adelphi, but they were very, very much around the Adelphi at the time when they started. You've got Pulp, Radiohead, Oasis, who were a good band when they played the Adelphi.
Amazing night, I was there. It was amazing.
They were a good band. People say, oh, well, they were unknown then and stuff like that, but they had a number one single, and they were a good band at that point. They never got the chance as a corporate commodified band to develop as a band because they have a successful debut single, an album, and their handlers, their owners will say more of the same. Don't go getting any artistic ideas about developing. Just do more of the same. So you get album after album of the same, and deteriorating standards. But they released a great album.
Yeah. I wouldn't mind being a quid behind them, though.
But yeah, you know, if you compare them with, say, the Beatles, who were very important, you know, their handlers, owners wanted them to remain as a skiffle band and continue playing massive football stadiums like the Shea Stadium in front of 70,000 people using a tannoy system as a PA. They didn't like that. They had ideas that they wanted to develop naturally as a band would in terms of music. So they had to break free of their corporate sort of major label shackles and create Apple and do their own thing. And in that time, they progressed from album to album and rewrote the rules of music.
It's a very, very good analogy.
It's what happened, you know, and it's what happens to corporate commodified bands,
which is not what the Adelphi was about. Just thinking back to episode 1 of the Curiosity Cast on this with yourself. Yeah. So if Taylor Swift's management rings you up and said, look, she wants to, you know, experience the full rock and roll club experience, any chance she can do Monday night on the musicians' night at the Adelphi, would you say no?
No, it would be interesting to see.
I was just checking, Jacko. I was just checking because it made me laugh when you talked about Taylor Swift in episode 1.
Taylor Swift and your Dua Lipas and your Beyonces, and I dare say Ed.
Because you had Lizzo played the Adelphi, didn't she? Supporting Harmar Superstar. Yeah. And she is a superstar.
I mean, you keep finding out things. Yeah, you know, I still keep finding things out about the Adelphi. You know, a couple of months back, for example, you know, going back to the beginning of what you refer to as a legend, you know, we had a gay night, which lasted a little over a year because we were at the onset of the AIDS epidemic. And there was a lot of initial focus on the gay community. And for various reasons, you know, the prominent public, you know, the professional sportsmen and the counsellors and within that community, they didn't like the media attention, and they were making demands on me that, you know, you've got to ban all the straights and you've got to ban all the lesbians and gay punks and things like that. So we in a friendly way, we agreed that, we'd bring the night, and they organised their own night and stuff like that. But we used to have drag acts on and all sorts of speciality acts, you know, male strippers and sort of things like that. But we had an artist called Candy Dewberry on, and Candy Dewberry, I remember, very, very nice, articulate guy whose performance was actually quite emotional. it was a very, very powerful, articulate and moving performance. And it transpires that Candy Du Barry was Neil Tennant of the Pet Shop Boys.
Oh, wow.
Who played the Adelphi. And I only found that out a couple of months ago.
I didn't know. Look,
yeah.
Producer Dave's jaw has dropped.
Mate, a jaw down, eyebrows up. I'm amazed.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, Candy Du Barry, I believe, and have been told recently, is what was Neil Tennant of the Pet Shop Boys. And you keep finding things that like that. Wow. And he was good. He was good. And the Pet Shop Boys have been a very, very good pop band.
Yeah.
Yeah, they pick great covers and give them...
Well, speaking of great pop bands, though, sorry, Dave. Oasis come, they play for one night, then they go on to be massive. But I think bands like Pulp were the definition of an Adelphi band for years before they became successful.
Well, people talk about Pulp, who, as a band whose career as artists ended in around the millennium. And I think it's really offensive and demeaning to the band to describe them in that way, because what they were doing, Pulp formed in the 70s, late 70s, at the end of the 70s. And Jarvis has been doing stuff post-Pulp that is marvellous. The stuff he did with Serafina Steer it's probably 6 or 7 years ago now, but it was marvellous. And Pulp started playing at the Adelphi in 1985 and were an absolutely magnificent band and beautiful people. And to me at the time, they represented an almost inexhaustible supply of incredibly talented bands from Sheffield. We had Treebound Story, Digfist Drill, AC Temple, other bands who were just amazing. And we had a sort of interchange, with Sheffield. I went over to Sheffield several times with Hall bands, and it was a really happy, and it felt like a really productive time at the Adelphi. I can remember taking bands like the Gargoyles and Vicious Circle over to Sheffield for gigs with these amazing bands from.
Was that the heyday of the club? When was there a heyday?
There's always been a heyday,
right?
I think that there have been great times all along, and there have been so many things. I mean, a personal time. I don't know how I found the time to do it, but was sort of working with bands like Kingmaker and Fonda, who I sort of took down to London and effectively managed them to the point where they had management and a record label release and publishing and everything they needed. The Adelphi was always more important, but for example, with Fonda, who are the great Hull band that nobody ever mentions, and they are a genuinely great band if you listen to their stuff. I mean, even going up to late, there was the stuff that I released, which was great and got the acclaim. We took them right to the brink of being quite big. Fonda, the Village label, and we were actually let down a little bit. So I'm reluctant to say it made the difference, but Fonda came very close to being, they were the next big thing in London. And it never quite happened.
Did you want them to be big, given what you've said about the commercialisation?
I wanted to see Fonda as musicians with a bit of money behind them, and to be able to sort of pack in their day jobs. They've always had their day jobs. And, Simon has had to look after himself and concentrate on other things after sort of 20-odd years. And they've broken up now. I don't know whether we'll see them again, but until very recently, if you listen to an album like Je m'appelle Stereo, which was about 2015 or something like that, that's 15 years after the first album, they're still producing great albums. Je m'appelle is very, very good. But the two albums I released were fantastic, and they got the press. You know, I actually made a conscious decision to release it on the first day of January, and I think it was 2000.
Happy New Year.
And a time of the year when there's nothing else being released, but we got we got 8s and 9s out of 10 for the single throughout the music press, and numerous albums of the week and albums of the month in the Observer and the Sunday Times and the Daily Mail, and the press they got was absolutely fantastic. But we never got the radio airplay, and that was largely because Simon sort of insisted with the single having a 20-second ambient introduction before it started.
So it's not grabbing anybody's attention then.
And that would have meant that no radio programmer would have included it, because they'd be pissing about. They'd have to set it up 20 seconds in, so it wouldn't have got radio airplay. But we had to drop our radio plugger and a load of newspaper advertising that we'd been given for very cheaply, because Hull City Council had, we'd had a promise of 1,800 quid from Hull City Council to support the release, and Hull City Council found a reason to not give us that, so we had to drop our radio plugger and all our newspaper advertising, and it might have made a big difference. I consider Fonda 500 to be one of the great bands in the world, because they don't sound like anybody other than Fonda 500, and they're the only band that uses Casio keyboards as a lead instrument, which is something that's frowned out. They make it sound fantastic, and the other thing about Fonda is, whereas they're quite a serious and angular band in some ways, there's this overriding strand of fun and danceability. One of the characteristics of a Fonda show, by comparison with a good club night, and we have great club nights at Hull, the likes of Payback and Residents Association, Easy Skanking.
My favourite, Easy Skanking.
Well, they're characterised by people dancing. Yeah. But there are also people who are just listening, and getting into the music and stuff like that. But at a Fonda show, there are more people dancing than at the best club nights. Everybody is dancing at a Fonda gig, and their music is incredibly danceable.
Do check out the back catalogue; it will be there somewhere in the digital atmosphere. You can find it. You're listening, by the way, to part 2 of an interview with Paul Jackson, the man behind the Adelphi. He doesn't want to be called legendary, so we'll call the Adelphi legendary. This is part 2.
Smelly old bloke in a wheelchair. That's all I am now.
Oh dear.
Good for nothing.
No, that's not the case, and you know that. You obviously you spoke with great affection about Fonda. How do you feel when bands, artists that you've had at the club go and play Glastonbury or something like that? Is there a warm glow of satisfaction, or do you know? I
guess. I mean, it's not prominent in my mind, but yeah. Okay. I mean, I wish. I wish Hull bands had done better than they have.
Have we underachieved then as a city musically?
Well, I always want Hull to be better, as I mentioned previously.
Right at the top of episode 1.
I mean, I think, and this is quite important. I think we're a victim really of trying to talk ourselves up too much. And I can talk Hull up, and I love the city, and it's great. But there's a massive gap between what we talk ourselves up to be and the reality of the situation, because as a population centre producing recognisable talent that's recognisable around the nation and around the world, we're actually in the bottom 5% and show no signs of emerging for that.
So we're underachieving.
We're massively underachieving. Yeah, I mean, if you compare Hull to a similar sized city like Bristol or Brighton, I mean, even a place like Sunderland, you know, as for every known artist that we've produced, they've produced 4 or 5.
How do we fix it, Paul? How do we? I know it's going to be a long-term thing, but how do you do it?
Well, I would doubt, you know, for this city, and you know, I've tried my best. You know, the Adelphi has had the effect of retaining talent in Hull and also attracting some people to come to Hull. You know, we've had quite a few students who've stayed in Hull, partly because of the Adelphi. You know, but the numbers are relatively small. You can't say that your city is working in a healthy way unless people are actually talent is actually migrating into the city, and we're actually retaining, not just retaining, but attracting talent to the city. That would be the hallmark of a successful music and cultural city. And that is not the case. Yeah, you know, we all know Hull people who've left to go to York, Leeds, Sheffield, Manchester, Glasgow, London, Bristol, wherever. People in Hull have generally had to leave. I've often thought they'd have to leave if they were to progress.
Has that not changed, and is that not just the nature of it?
Well, you can't address it just by talking up. I think...
But the alternative is to talk it down, Paul.
Well, the alternative is to talk in a positive way about what we need to do to get people to migrate to Hull. And I would wager that conversation has never happened at a political level in Hull. I would wager that conversation has never happened. Yes, there are things that need to be done. There are probably 100 things, but I mentioned 3 things. One would be to embrace our student population more closely, as the Adelphi has done in its tiny way and done effectively. I think that there's something that we've demonstrated there. You know, I think the usual conversation at council level when it comes to students is, we don't want those buggers taking public money. They regard them as something separately. I'm going to go on to 3 things. So.
All right, okay, we'll do the 3 things, and I might have a little argument with you.
Okay, we'll have an argument then. But let me do the 3 things
right,
first.
Come on.
We need to embrace our student population more closely and think about how we can make them feel more welcome. The second thing is that, you know, when we're talking City of Music and stuff like that, and how fantastic we are.
This is a proposal, isn't it, to be a UNESCO City of Music?
There are big shortcomings in our local music education system in places such as the Albemarle. You know, the nearest thing we could claim in the context of City of Music is City of Tribute Bands and Cover Bands. Mm-hmm. Our educational provision needs to be upgraded. I mean, a good creative education system such as exists in places like Leeds, Sheffield and Newcastle comes to mind as well. And Bristol is fantastic. Would attract people, talented young musicians into the city. Yeah, you know, there's no doubt about that. And our education system performs very poorly. And I also think that Hull has a history of, it lacks ambition in a way. You know, we tend to look at what happens in other cities and do it. If it works there, we'll adopt it here. I think that's a bit of a problem. We have ideas of our own, and we need to generate other ideas of our own that, again, could attract people to the city. I've briefly, you know, mentioned initiatives relating to the voices of women getting out more, releasing, you know, the final piece of the feminist jigsaw, which is still being ignored.
Coming back to the music and the underachievement.
Yeah.
You say we're underachieving, but there have been bands and artists that have come from Hull.
Of course there are.
There is a thriving grassroots scene. You look at the Sesh and the Humber Street Sesh, which is, one of the great days, and they're not tribute bands, they're not cover bands.
No,
they are young people of all persuasions from the city getting up on a stage and doing it and bringing joy to thousands of people and everything.
I totally acknowledge that, Dave. What Hull lacks is, you can also say that Hull lacks diversity in music.
But you were providing it.
You've seen the diversity of stuff that I've programmed.
Well, exactly. You were providing it.
It's often quite rare to be able to find a support band. Every band you look at, you can see the bands they've been listening to and they're influenced by. One of the things that characterises bands in Hull is that there are always too many bands trying to draw on the same influences. I won't go current, but it's still the same today. If you imagine when the House Martins or Oasis were big, say Oasis, there were probably 60-70% of the bands in Hull were trying to be the new Oasis. And you would have been saying, oh, this is great, we've got this really vibrant scene, all these bands trying to be the new Oasis.
But no, I'm going to interrupt, because I've always said that I didn't think there was a Hull sound, and I actually, as a punter, purely a punter, liked the fact that there was a lot of diversity and different sounds. There wasn't a Hull sound for me.
Yeah. Well. Okay, we're coming from slightly different directions. One of the problems with Hull has been that, and I mentioned Oasis, at that time, if there'd been 120 bands in Hull, there would probably have been 60 or 70 of those bands trying to sound like the new Oasis. And what those bands didn't realise, there would probably have been another, and if you imagine yourself being an industry executive, there'd have probably been another 60 or 70 in York. There would have been 120 in Leeds and 130 in Sheffield. There'd have been 300 bands drawing on the same set of influences in Manchester.
Agreed.
Probably 250 in Birmingham. And throughout the country, there'd have been 1,000 trying to be the new Oasis, or 3,000 in London trying to be the new Oasis. That's not the way forward if you want to make a career in music. How many Oasis sound-alikes became stars? I mean, Britpop was actually quite varied in the end. I mean, Blur and Pulp and the other bands. There were no bands that made it who sounded like Oasis, and Hull has fallen into that trap too often. And you can understand bands wanting to play the music by the bands they like and trying to sound similar. There's a big difference between the joy of doing that and actually taking positive career steps. You've got to find something that distinguishes you from all the other sound-alike bands.
I would wholeheartedly agree, which is why I come back to it. I don't think there's a Hull sound per se. But let us sort of conclude this episode of the Curiosity Cast by coming back to the venue, and a grassroots venue like the Adelphi. How do we make sure? How does Hull make sure that venues like the Adelphi continue? That there will be that link in the musical chain? Sounds a bit of a pompous question, but I'm asking it. It's out there now, Jacko. How do we do it? Who needs to do what?
That's a difficult question.
I'm glad I've had one.
I think from a council point of view, I think it's got to avoid a situation in which a place like the Adelphi is considered to be an outsider and is mistrusted because the council had no part in it. I think, and I'm thinking of departments within the council, where those sort of attitudes have surfaced from time to time, if that makes any sort of sense.
Were you seen as a stroppy rebel?
I think there's a recognisable legacy of a place like the Adelphi, and I were, I'll probably be long gone by, and the Adelphi will still be going. I hope it never has to struggle because of council ignorance. The Adelphi does represent and will continue to represent something important, and I played a part of that, but there are new people who will continue that legacy, and I really hope they get the support from the council that the place deserves, as I hope they also get the consideration of funding bodies and the Arts Council and everything like that, because we had a good relationship with the Arts Council.
You brought magic to Diggory Street, to Hull. I want to say thank you for that. It's a wonderful place. It continues to be a wonderful place. And tar for that, and tar for joining us on the CuriosityCast.
That's all right, yeah.
So I've enjoyed the conversation now.
I'll see you outside in 5 minutes.
For a cig break. It's been an absolute pleasure. Paul Jackson's been our guest on the last 2 episodes of the CuriosityCast. Don't forget, remember, you can ask questions and seek answers on the Curiosity website, www.curiosityhull.co.uk, or follow and befriend us on the socials, where we're Curiosity Hull on all the main feeds. We'll be back very soon with more quality answers to whatever question you'd like to ask.